In a forgotten corner of the earth where time coils like smoke around stone, a young paleontologist stumbles upon something impossible, a perfectly preserved aqualops, skull still warm to the touch and pulsing faintly with life. The fossil defies every rule of science and whispers secrets meant to stay buried, drawn into a mystery older than human memory. He must choose between exposing the truth and unleashing something that should never awaken. For deep beneath the ground where bones sleep, a heartbeat stirs and history prepares to roar back to life one final time. Approximate 800 to 1,000 words as part of the full 6,000-word structure. The desert wind carried a dry whisper that spoke only to those who listened closely. It moved across the Utah Badlands like a spirit searching for something lost. Dust curled around the boots of Dr. Elias Venn as he knelt beside a stretch of sun-baked earth that had not seen footsteps in centuries. His hands were steady. His breath was shallow. His eyes were fixed on the tiny curve of bone peeking from the rock, like a secret waiting to be heard. He had spent years chasing ghosts, years of funding proposals unanswered, of lectures to empty rooms, of nights wondering if he had chosen the right life. This field trip was not even official. Just him, a rented truck, 2 weeks of leave, and a hunch based on satellite maps and soil records no one had bothered to read. He had not expected much. Maybe a few traces of ceratopsian remains. Not this. The skull was no larger than a fist, yet every ridge was sharp, every line precise. It looked fresh, almost too fresh, as if time had forgotten to decay it. He reached out with his brush, cleared a line of sediment, and froze. The skull was warm. Not the warmth of sun-baked stone, not the fading memory of days' heat. This was a slow, rhythmic warmth of something alive, faint, unbelievable, real. He pulled his hand back as it burned, heart thudding with a sudden rush of confusion and fear. He looked around. No sound but wind, no movement but his own shadow stretching longer with the lowering sun. Still, something felt wrong, or right. He could not decide which. Elias crouched closer. His fingers hovered just above the surface. The fossil pulsed. Once, then again, a gentle push like a heartbeat echoing through time. He had spent his whole life studying the past. Now the past had turned and looked back at him. He sat down slowly. Logic war with instinct. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small scanner, the kind used for preliminary field analysis. When he passed it over the skull, the device blinked erratically and died. The battery had been full an hour ago. He checked his phone. Blank screen. The compass on his watch spun aimlessly before stopping with a jerk. He whispered aloud, though no one could hear him. "What are you?" As if an ant of the ground shifted slightly beneath him. A vibration. Subtle but there. As if something old and buried had stirred for the first time in millions of years. He stayed until night fell, afraid to leave, more afraid to stay. The stars came out cold and bright above him, but the air near the fossil stayed warm, steady, alive. By morning he knew he could not walk away. Not yet, not without answers, not without understanding what he had found or what had found him, because this was no ordinary discovery. This was not a fossil. It was something older, something deeper, something waiting, and its name had been lost until now. Aqualops. Elias drove back to his camp with the fossil packed in a shockproof container lined with foam and regret. Every instinct told him it should not be moved, but he also could not leave it behind. Not with what he had felt, what he had seen. The sun was already high by the time he reached the base camp he had built alone 3 days before. 2 tents, a folding table, an old cooler humming beside a generator. He opened the container. The fossil, if that word still applied, sat still and silent. The warmth had faded, but not entirely. He checked it with another scanner. This one lit up for a moment before blinking out like the first. Whatever energy pulsed through the object seemed to interfere with electronics. Even his camera refused to function within 6 feet of it. He took out a notebook and began sketching. Every ridge, every plate, every detail of the tiny skull was unlike any aqualops specimen he had studied. It was more complete, more intact, almost as if it had never died. Its surface held an almost translucent sheen, like something covered in a thin organic film. It reminded him more of eggshell than fossil. He worked for hours. Then he began to hear the hum. It started faint like a pressure behind the ears, a soft vibration at the edge of thought. He tried to ignore it, blame fatigue, dehydration, the heat, but it grew stronger, not louder, stronger, like a presence in a room that refused to speak, a sound that lived in his spine instead of his ears. When he stepped away from the skull, the hum weakened. When he stepped closer, it returned. That night, he dreamed of green skies and rivers that ran backward, of creatures that looked almost like dinosaurs, but not quite. He saw eyes in the dark. He saw the earth break and the stars fall. When he woke, his shirt was damp and the skull sat upright in the box, though he remembered placing it on its side. He whispered again, "What are you?" No answer came, but the hum remained. 3 days passed. On the 4th, a visitor came. Her truck rolled into camp, at noon raising a curtain of dust. She stepped out wearing field boots and a canvas vest. Her hair was tied back. Her eyes scanned everything with precision of a hawk. Elias knew her face before she said a word. "Dr. Murachun," he said, standing. "Didn't expect company." She didn't smile. "You filed a fragment report under a pseudonym. The coordinates were embedded in the metadata. You wanted someone to come." He hesitated. "I wanted the right person. I was in Patagonia. You pulled me across continents for what? Some unusual fossilized lizard skull?" He opened the case. She said nothing for a full minute. Then, "That's not fossilized. That's fresh tissue." He nodded. She stepped back. "Elias, this is impossible." "I know." "No, you don't. This isn't just biologically intact. It's pre-Cretaceous design with post-Cretaceous structure. You're holding something that never existed. Not here. Not now. Not on this evolutionary tree." She ran a gloved finger over the bone-like ridges. "Did you do any scans?" "They die near it." "Any readings?" "Nothing consistent. All magnetic instruments spin out. Electronics shut down." She turned to him. "It's giving off a field. Biological or not, that's energy. Something's active." He nodded again. "It hums." They didn't sleep that night. Together, they cataloged what they could. Physical measurements. Sketches. Longhand notes. They spoke less as night came. Something in the air pressed down harder than the darkness. The hum grew sharper. At dawn, they heard the first sound from outside. A sharp cry. Not coyote. Not bird. Something deeper. Older. Like the echo of a roar buried under rock and time. They stood in silence. The cry came again. Then another. Then silence. "What if it's not alone?" she said. He looked at her. "What if it's not dead?" she said. They covered the skull and drove toward the fossil site. It looked unchanged, but the ground bore new impressions. Not footprint exactly, but depressions in strange arrangements, as if claws or limbs had dragged across the surface in a pattern too perfect to be chance. Mara took out a notebook. Her hands shook. "These are directional. They're moving from the site, away from it. To where?" She looked toward the distant hills. "To us." They returned to camp. The cooler was broken. The generator sat silent. The tent poles had been bent from the inside, as if something had pushed out, not in. The skull was gone. There were no tracks, no signs of struggle, just silence and the slow fading of the hum which had lived in the air since its discovery. Elias crouched where the case had been. It left. Mara stood still. It woke. They stared at each other. The word no longer felt strange. Alive. Whatever it was. It had moved. It had chosen. And it had left. That night the wind changed. They heard new sounds. Breathing. Not human. Not machine. Just outside the tent. When they rushed out, flashlights caught nothing. But the sense of being watched remained. By morning the camp was surrounded by the same impressions they had seen near the dig. Not quite footprints. Not quite claw marks. The same pattern in every direction. Mara looked at him. "You said it hummed?" "Yes. It's not humming anymore." He looked up. Maybe it doesn't need to, he said. Maybe it found what was calling. The sun never broke through the clouds the next morning. A flat gray hung over the landscape, muting every shadow. The world felt colorless, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Elias and Mara didn't speak much. They packed quickly, not to leave but to move, to follow whatever trail the creature had left, if it could be called a creature at all. The ground led them east, toward the canyons that swallowed sunlight by mid-afternoon. The markings were fainter now, not like steps but like ripples across a sheet of water that it's instilled. Something had passed through, and it had left the air heavier than before. By noon, they reached a rock face that shimmered slightly in the heat. Mara paused. Her hand reached forward and passed through it. "It's a veil," she said. Elias stepped forward. The shimmer parted like mist, revealing a narrow passage behind the rock, something carved by time or something else entirely. The stone walls pulsed faintly with the same energy that once surrounded the skull. They entered without speaking. The passage opened into a chamber, wide, circular, too symmetrical to be natural. Carvings covered the walls, patterns that resembled spirals, stars, and what looked like bones, each line etched with something finer than any tool they knew. In the center sat the skull, no longer warm. It floated above a stone pedestal, surrounded by a soft glow. It turned slowly, not spinning but breathing, as if it was testing the air around it. Mara stepped forward. "This is a chamber of memory." Elias raised his head. "How do you know?" "I don't, but I feel it." The air thickened. The hum returned, deeper now, more resonant. It vibrated through the walls, through their skin, through their thoughts. Images flickered at the edge of vision, not hallucinations, not dreams, memories, not theirs. They saw oceans steaming under a violet sky. They saw creatures too small to be dinosaurs, but too intelligent to be beasts. They saw cities made of bone and glass. They saw stars falling from the sky like fire. And then they saw them leave. Ships carved from crystal and marrow, vanishing into the stars. A choice made not in fear, but in calculation. Some stayed behind, buried in time, in fossil, in dust. Waiting. For what? "You feel that?" Mara asked, voice thin. Elias nodded. "They're not extinct. They never were." The skull pulsed once. The chamber answered. A light spread to the carvings on the walls, outlining every mark in a glow that felt like thought. The patterns became language, not read but understood. The chamber didn't speak. It remembered. It poured those memories into them like a stream forced through a narrow pipe. Mara staggered. "It's not just a message. It's a blueprint." Elias steadied her. "For what?" She pointed to the skull. "Rebirth." The skull dropped. Not fell, descended, softly, like it was setting itself down. The light faded. Behind them, the passage sealed. Elias moved the wall. No opening, no crack, just smooth, glowing stone. They were sealed in. Mara crouched beside the skull. "We activated something. I think this place was a vault, or a tomb, or a seed." Elias looked at the carvings again. They had changed. Now the bones no longer formed graves. They formed shapes that resembled creatures standing upright, wearing tools, wielding thought. A progression. A plan. Not extinction. Evolution. A sound cut through the chamber. It was no hum. It was a voice. Low. Ancient. Not in words, but in intent. It wrapped around them, pressed into their minds, not asking permission. It wasn't a language. It was memory reshaped into command. "You opened the gate." Mara froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Elias nodded slowly. "You held the key. Now the gate is open. The cycle continues." The skull glowed again. This time it cracked. Tiny fissures spidered across its surface. It split open like an egg. Inside, not bone, not flesh, a sphere. Organic, translucent, beating. A heart. Still alive, still waiting. Mara reached toward it, but Elias stopped her. "We don't know what it is." "It's not what it is," she said. "It's who." The heartbeat grew stronger. Outside the sealed walls, the world began to change. A tremor moved through the ground. The wind stopped. Birds fell silent. In the sky, clouds formed shapes not natural, not random. Shapes of bones. Shapes of wings. In the chamber, the carvings began to shift again. Faster. Spinning inward. Forming a single glyph at the center of the room. Aqualops. The name was not just a species. It was a code, a signal, a sentinel. Elias understood now. Aqualops was never just a dinosaur. It was a seed of something older, something left behind, not to survive, but to begin again. Mara turned to him. If we let it hatch, it might change everything. If we destroy it, we end the cycle. The ground trembled again. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Outside, something was coming. They had no weapons, no contact, no time, only a choice. Elias looked at the heart. It pulsed, and the walls whispered. Choose. Would you like to proceed to the falling action next, around 1,000 to 1,200 words, or revise any part of the story so far, before continuing? You said, falling action. ChatGPT said, here is the falling action of the story, Aqualops, following directly from the climax. In this section, the consequences of the choice unfold. Mystery gives way to reality, and the pressure of time drives the characters toward resolution. Falling action. Approximate. 1,200 words. The chamber shook again. This time the tremor did not fade. Dust fell from above like falling ash. The heartbeat from the sphere intensified, echoing not only in the room, but in Elias's chest like it found a way to sync with him, with both of them. Mara's fingers hovered just above the orb. It's not just life, she said. It's a signal, a restart. If we trigger it. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Elias stared at the glyph on the wall. Aqualops. The word meant more than a name now. It was a legacy left behind by a species that had mastered biology, memory, and perhaps even time. They had hidden it in plain sight, disguised as an extinct creature embedded deep in Earth's fossil record. Not just for survival, but for continuity. The Earth had ended once before, and something had survived, not physically, but in code, in cells, in instinct. A second pulse rolled through the rock. The glyph shifted again. They had no way of knowing what came next. If the sphere would release energy, unleash a creature, rewrite genetics, or even terraform the land around them. But they could feel it pressing in. An intelligence buried in silence and stone now pushing forward like a flood through a cracked dam. Mara looked over at Elias. Her hand dropped back to her side. I can't do it. His eyebrows lifted. It's too much, she said. This isn't discovery. It's resurrection. Or worse. Elias turned to the sphere. It still beat. Still waited. It chose us, he said. Not because we're worthy, but because we found it. That doesn't mean we understand it. Nothing in science begins with understanding. It begins with contact. Another tremor hit, larger. A fissure split across the chamber floor. Light burst upward in a shaft of green and gold. The carvings around them glowed brighter. The heartbeat stuttered. The sphere was reacting to the Earth itself. The cycles were aligned. Now or never. Mara stepped back. Elias stepped forward. He reached out. His hand touched the surface of the sphere. It was warm. It was alive. And it knew him. The heartbeat slowed, steadying like a rhythm matched with breath. Suddenly, the light pulsed outward. The glyph vanished. The chamber went dark. No sound. No hum. No light. Just silence. For one long moment, Elias thought they had failed, or that the world had. Then a low glow returned. Not from the orb, from the stone itself. The walls were smooth now, the carvings gone. The passage that had vanished behind them now stood open again. The veil lifted. The orb rested on the floor, inert. Whatever had been waiting had happened. Elias turned to Mara. Her eyes were wide. Did it do anything? I don't know, he said, but I think it did enough. They stepped outside the chamber. The air was different. The pressure was lighter. The clouds above had broken into sharp spirals that moved against the wind. The earth smelled like rain, though no water had fallen. The shadows of the canyons were deeper, and in the distance, they heard something cry out again, not a roar, not a scream. A call, not from a predator, but from something new, or something very old. Back at the dig site, they returned to the place where the skull had first been found. Now there was a small mound of stone at the center of the clearing. Where there had once been impressions of claws and dragging limbs, there were now circles, clean, unbroken, etched into the sand. The energy field had vanished. Their scanners worked again. Their phones blinked to life. The generator back at the camp whirred. When Elias tried it, everything had returned, except the world wasn't quite the same. They knew something had changed, not visibly, not in headlines or satellite feeds, but in the DNA of the world. The pulse had gone out. A reset had begun. They spent 3 more days documenting every detail, writing everything down the old way, on paper, as if the story could survive longer that way. But they both knew it wasn't their story anymore. It belonged to the thing they had awakened, or to whatever came next. On the last morning, they packed up the camp. Before leaving, Elias turned back once. The mound of stone was gone. In its place stood a small sapling, green, alive, new. Mara said nothing. She just looked at him. He nodded. They drove away. Behind them, the wind carried the hum again, low, distant, steady. Aqualops had returned, not as a creature, as a cycle. The world continued to spin. Planes flew, phones rang, cities breathed, and yet, beneath the rhythm of ordinary life, something had shifted. It was too subtle for most notice. A change not of events, but of foundations. Dr. Elias Venn returned to his university. He resumed lectures, wrote papers, but none mentioned the skull. None mentioned the sphere. None mentioned the chamber carved in time and silence. Not because he feared ridicule, but because he knew the world wasn't ready to understand what it meant to awaken a memory too large to fit in science. Mara disappeared from public work entirely. She sent a postcard once. No return address. On it was a drawing of a spiral-shaped glyph and 2 words. Still listening. The fossil records in his lab felt different now, as if they were watching him, as if the bones knew. One day, he received a small package with no sender. Inside was a single page from one of the notebooks they'd used at the site. Drawn across it was a tree, no larger than a thumb, and beneath its roots was a curled figure, tiny and horned. An aqualops, only it wasn't extinct. It was growing. In the years that followed, subtle anomalies began to surface across the globe. Pollen from species not seen since the Paleogene. Soil samples in remote regions rich with unfamiliar microorganisms. Migratory patterns of birds subtly altered, as if something unseen had tugged at their ancient instincts. Some scientists noticed. Most dismissed it. But those who listened carefully, those who stood out in the desert silence and heard the wind hum, they knew. The cycle had not restarted with violence or catastrophe. It had begun gently, quietly, through roots, through echoes, through time, through memory. The earth had not been rewritten. It had been reminded. One last visit, one final return. Elias stood again at the place where the fossil had first been found. The Badlands were warmer than he remembered. The horizon shimmered with gold. Where the sapling had once grown, now stood a small tree, just over his head. Its leaves were thick, veined, not from any known species. He touched the bark. It pulsed once, a soft heartbeat, familiar, not loud, not urgent, just there, a breath through the centuries. He closed his eyes and whispered the name one more time. Aqualops. Not a creature, not a fossil, not a warning. A memory, left behind not in fear, but in hope.